Hey everyone, welcome back. We all know that feeling, right? You put in the time to learn something, but it just doesn't seem to stick.
Yeah, you read and reread, but then
Poof, gone, like it never even happened.
exactly.
So today, we're doing a deep dive into the science of learning. We've got a stack of research here,
Evidence-based stuff.
all about how to learn better, faster, and actually remember what you've learned.
And most importantly, we're going to make this practical. We'll give you actionable strategies that you can start using right away.
So let's jump right in. One of the biggest myths out there is that just being familiar with something means you've learned it. Like you read over your notes a bunch of times, you highlight everything, and you think, okay, I'm good. But then the test comes,
Or you try to apply that knowledge in the real world.
and it just doesn't work.
Yeah, and this is something that's actually backed by research. Like the idea that familiarity can actually create a false sense of confidence.
Oh, I definitely relate to that. So what's a better approach then?
Well, the research points to something called the testing effect. Some people also call it the power of active retrieval.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Basically, instead of passively absorbing information, you actively try to recall it from memory.
So no notes, no looking stuff up.
Exactly. It's like giving yourself a pop quiz.
Okay, but why does that work so much better?
It seems counterintuitive, but forcing your brain to retrieve information actually strengthens the memory. Think about it. When you try to remember something, you're activating multiple areas of your brain. You're engaging your prefrontal cortex, the thinking part, the hippocampus, where memories are formed, and the temporal lobe involved in understanding.
Wow, so it's like a full brain workout just by trying to remember something.
Right. And the more you do this, the stronger those neural connections become, and the easier it becomes to access that information later on.
So basically, if you want to remember something, you got to practice actually retrieving it.
Yeah, and there are tons of studies that back this up. Like students who actively quiz themselves consistently perform better on exams.
So ditch the passive highlighting and start quizzing yourself. Got it. But even if we manage to learn something well, there's still that pesky problem of forgetting, right?
Oh, absolutely. We all know the feeling of information just slipping away over time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually a term for this. It's called the forgetting curve.
The forgetting curve. Right. It's
Yeah.
like the steeper the curve, the faster you forget.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a natural process.
Yeah.
But the good news is that there's a really powerful technique to combat this. It's called spaced repetition.
Spaced repetition. Okay, I've heard of that, but I'm not exactly sure how it works.
So imagine you're learning a new concept. Instead of cramming and trying to remember everything at once, you space out your review sessions over time.
So, like, instead of studying everything the night before the test, you spread it out over days or even weeks.
Precisely. You review the material shortly after you first learn it, then again a little while later, and then again even later. And the key is to space out those reviews at increasing intervals.
So the first review might be after a day, the next one after a few days, and then maybe a week later.
You got it. And the beauty of this is that you're reviewing the information right before you're likely to forget it, which makes the memory even stronger.
It's like you're strategically reminding your brain just at the right moment.
Exactly. And again, there's tons of research supporting this method. Spaced repetition has been shown to be incredibly effective for long-term retention.
Okay, so spaced repetition is in, cramming is out.
Out, definitely out.
Now, I also wanted to talk about mixing up your studying. Like, instead of focusing on one subject for a huge chunk of time, you switch between different topics. Is there a name for that technique?
Yes, that's called interleaving.
Interleaving. Okay, so like if I'm studying for different classes, I might do a bit of math, then some history, then back to math, and so on.
That's the idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it can feel less efficient in the short term. You might think, I just want to get through all this math. But actually, by switching between different topics, you force your brain to work harder.
So instead of just coasting on autopilot, you're constantly having to shift gears.
Yeah, and that's a good thing because it helps you to better understand and remember the information in the long run. It's like your brain is constantly having to decide, okay, which mental tool do I need for this task? And that process strengthens the learning.
So it's about challenging your brain to make connections and see the bigger picture. That makes sense. Now, what about when you really want to get a deep understanding of a concept? Is there a technique for that?
There is. It's called the Feynman technique.
The Feynman technique. Okay, I've never heard of that one.
It's named after Richard Feynman, a brilliant physicist known for his ability to explain complex ideas in simple ways.
So it's all about simplifying things, making it easy to understand.
Exactly. And the core idea is that if you can't explain something simply, you don't really understand it yourself.
Oh, that's a good point. So how do you actually use this technique?
It involves 4 steps. The first is to choose a concept you want to learn, and then try to explain it in your own words, as if you were teaching it to someone who knows nothing about it.
So pretend I'm your student and you have to teach me something.
Exactly. And as you're explaining, you'll likely find areas where you get stuck or where your explanation isn't quite clear. Those are the gaps in your understanding. So the second step is to identify those gaps.
Okay, so pinpoint the areas where I'm like, wait, I don't quite get that part.
Yep. And then the third step is to go back to your source material and relearn those specific areas. Focus on filling in those gaps. And finally, once you feel like you have a better grasp, try to explain the concept again. But this time, simplify your explanation even further.
So keep refining it until it's crystal clear.
Precisely. And the act of simplifying forces you to really understand the core principles at play.
That's awesome. So teach it, find the gaps, relearn, and simplify. The Feynman technique. Got it. Are there any other tools or techniques that can help us learn better?
Oh, definitely. There are so many great strategies out there. One that I really like is mind mapping.
Mind mapping. I've seen those before. They're like these visual diagrams with branches and stuff.
Exactly. And they're really helpful for organizing information and seeing the connections between different ideas. You start with a central concept in the middle of the page and then branch out to related ideas.
Kind of looks like a tree with the main idea as the trunk and the branches representing the supporting concepts.
That's a great way to visualize it. And the cool thing about mind mapping is that it aligns with how our brains naturally process information. Our thoughts aren't linear, they jump around and make connections.
So instead of trying to force our thoughts into a linear outline, mind mapping allows us to capture the way our brains actually work.
Exactly. And it can be really helpful for brainstorming, studying, or just organizing your thoughts in general.
I'll definitely have to give that a try. Are there any other techniques that you find helpful?
Well, another really popular one is the Pomodoro technique.
Pomodoro, like the tomato.
Yeah, it's named after those tomato-shaped kitchen timers.
Okay, so what's the tomato connection?
The Pomodoro technique is all about working in focused intervals. You set a timer for 25 minutes and work on a single task without distractions. Then, you take a short 5-minute break, and after 4 Pomodoros, you take a longer break of 20-30 minutes.
So it's like a structured way to manage your time and prevent burnout.
Exactly. It helps you to stay focused and avoid mental fatigue.
And those breaks are essential for letting your brain rest and recharge.
Right. And the beauty of the Pomodoro technique is that it's so simple to implement. You can use any timer you like.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about the testing effect, spaced repetition, interleaving, the Feynman technique, mind mapping, and the Pomodoro technique. That's a lot of tools.
There's a whole toolkit for smarter learning.
Exactly. And the key takeaway here is that these aren't just random tips or tricks. They're all based on scientific research about how our brains actually learn best.
So if you're serious about improving your learning, give these techniques a try.
And remember, what works for one person might not work for another. So experiment, find what fits your learning style, and most importantly, have fun with it.
Learning should be an adventure, not a chore.
Well said. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive today. But before we go, we'd love for you to consider this question. Now that you know a bit more about the science of learning, what's one thing you might do differently the next time you want to master something new?
Think about it. How can you apply these principles to your own learning journey?
Thanks for joining us, and happy learning.